What happens when you can't forgive someone? What happens when the hurt just seems too great that you really can't forgive somebody? Have you ever been in that situation? I'm sure most of us have been in that situation at some point in our lives, and it's difficult. It is difficult. I did a video probably over a year ago now, a year and a half ago, about forgiving my mother, which I was able to do. And it was not an easy thing to do. And it took a while. I did some of the forgiving before she passed away, and some of it came after she passed away. But I was able to do that. And I've also been able to forgive myself in my own life, which is actually probably one of the most difficult things to do is to forgive yourself. I will link a video to that I did on the idea of forgiving yourself. I think I did it around the same time as I did forgiving my mother. And so forgiveness is not always easy. And I struggle with it still with a couple of people in my own life. So I'm going to talk today about why it is so difficult to forgive others. And I'm going to put it in the context of one of the issues I have around forgiveness, which is forgiveness of my sister. So that way I'll give it kind of a real life example as I go through these. But it is important to forgive. You see, what happens to you when you don't forgive is you create a lot more internal stress in yourself. It worsens anxiety, depression. It can create a whole host of like stress related illnesses and physical problems. And if there's a lot of people that you have not been able to forgive, it really eats away at you. It eats away at you mentally, and it can eat away at you physically. So I really encourage any of you out there that are struggling with forgiveness to really listen to what I talk about today, but also really try to find a way to begin that process. And it is a process. It's not about a total end result. As I mentioned, I've been able to forgive my mother. Now, does that always mean that some frustration or anger doesn't come up in me when I remember something about my mother, like a memory or something? No, it doesn't mean that. It means, though, that I'm not hanging on to very deep resentment and bitterness and hate or whatever. I'm not doing that. But does it mean it's completely fine? No. No, you still have memories of things and you think, yeah, that wasn't a great experience or that wasn't a great moment or whatever. So I think there's a misconception that forgiveness, it's like there's an end goal and somehow once you forgive, it's over and done with. It's not really totally like that. It continues to be a process. And you may be able to forgive, 20% or 50% or whatever. And you may never get to 100%. But it's still better to forgive on some level than to not forgive at all. And before we get into this also, let me remind you, forgiveness is ultimately about you. It's not about the person you're forgiving. It's about what's going on inside you, the hurt and the pain inside you. That's what it's about. It's about releasing that. It's not about the other person may not even know you've forgiven them. And that's okay. What's important is that you process your own feelings. So I just want to give that disclaimer before we really get into this. So, what are the things that keep us from forgiving? Okay, what are the things that keep us from forgiving? The first thing that may cause us to not be able to forgive very easily is that it's rooted in some deeper issue with that person or situation. So we may be mad about one thing, but it may be about something far deeper. So let me give you an example from my relationship with my sister. My sister is 7 years older than I am. We are the only two siblings in the family. And when I was born, I think she felt jealous and displaced. And it wasn't helped by the fact that when I was a baby, I was sickly. And I was in and out of the hospital till I was 2.5, 3 years old. I think she felt, like she wasn't getting the attention and that I was grabbing all the attention. And, as a child, I can't blame her for that. But that's how far back our problems go, is all the way back to when I was born. So when I was growing up, my sister wasn't often very nice to me. I mean, I guess that's the best way I can say it. She acted like I was just a necessary evil or something. So it was a difficult situation. And after our father died when I was 10 and my sister was 17 at that time, we did grow closer for a while she was in college and she would come home from break. It was the first time I think we really started to bond as sisters. And so I was heading into my teens and, she was in college. But all that kind of went away when she got married at 21 because she married somebody who really didn't want her to be close to her family and really kind of pulled her away from that. So after that, I've never really been close to her. And in fact, we've had periods of estrangement, which I'll probably get to as I discuss more of these things. But the point is, we didn't have a good foundation. We didn't have a good foundation to begin with. So the reason why it's so hard to forgive for me with my sister is that it goes back to me being a child. Like she never, except for that period after our father died, she never was much of a sister to me. And so there's a lot of resentment on my part and a lot of bitterness about it. And that's one of the reasons I've had a hard time forgiving her. It was actually easier to forgive my mother because we had a lot more positive things in our past than I do with my sister. So that's the first thing. The second reason it's hard to forgive is that people misconstrue that. They think that forgiving someone is to accept their behavior. In other words, you're forgiving them for whatever, and so you're accepting what they did. And in fact, when I did that video about my mother, I had some people really comment and say they would never be able to do that with their mother because there was just too much hurt, basically. And I understand that. I get that. It is very difficult to separate out the forgiveness from the idea of you've accepted what they did to you. But it doesn't have to be that way. Forgiving has nothing to do with accepting. Some of the things my mother did to me were then and now completely unacceptable. But that did not impede my willingness to forgive her. I realized that she was a damaged person. So it was never about accepting what she did. It was just about forgiving it. So that is the second thing. Now with my sister, I think it's a little tougher because we've had a lot more really nasty things that have gone on in adulthood with us. So I think it's a lot harder than it was even with my mother to be able to forgive her for some of that. Third thing that people struggle with in forgiving is that when you forgive someone, it actually brings up a lot of stuff inside of ourselves. In other words, it brings up a lot of emotions, a lot of memories, a lot of things that make us feel a lot more vulnerable. And a lot of people have shut the door on that. And because they've shut the door on that, they don't want to revisit those feelings. They don't want to go through that emotion again. And that's understandable as well, because it does come up. When you forgive somebody, there's a lot of emotion that does come up around it. And it's kind of necessary for that to happen so we can clear a lot of those feelings. In other words, if we don't feel them, we can't clear them. It's just like when you're grieving and you have to feel the stuff to heal. That's the saying in bereavement is you have to feel to heal. And you do. Absolutely. So the same is true with forgiving. You do have to feel it. And so for people who don't want to feel it, they're going to have a hard time with forgiveness. Now, for me, this isn't a big issue. I pretty much have to feel things. I've never had a good way to, tamp down feelings inside myself. So this is not a big issue for me, but I do understand how it is a big issue for a lot of people. The next reason people have for not being able to forgive is some people like to hold on to grievance. Some people really like to hold on to the idea that they're the aggrieved party and they're a victim. Now, this one again is not really an issue for me, but I do understand it is an issue for a lot of people. That, if you want to be the martyr in this situation, then you feel like if you forgive, you give that up. You can no longer claim to be the victim of it. If somebody was really horrible to you, you can't hold that up as a badge of honor in some way. um, you have to move past that. You have to be able to be willing to let go of the victimhood. Otherwise, you're just going to keep being stuck in not being able to forgive, and that is a tough one. I think this is part of actually my sister's, because I've talked about me being unwilling to forgive her. I don't believe she has forgiven me for things either. And I think part of that on her part, because she's basically told me in so many words, is that she wants to play the victim about this. She thinks I did something wrong to her before she did something really wrong to me. So she uses that as an excuse and to be the victim about it. It's really not that clear cut. So um but that's the way she functions. So I'm pretty sure my sister, we have not spoken now in 9 years. So I'm pretty sure though my sister does not or has not forgiven me. The next one is one I think is really important. The reason why you can't forgive is a lot of people think to forgive, you have to be able to talk to the other person, right? You have to actually go and say to them, I forgive you. No, you don't have to do that. You never have to tell them you forgive them. I never told my mother. It's not part of the process. The forgiveness, remember, is about you. It's about healing you. It's not about the relationship, because you can forgive somebody and still never have a relationship with them again, never have any future contact with them. But the forgiveness is about what's in your own heart and your own soul and your own, psyche. It's not about being able to tell them. In fact, very often telling somebody you forgive them it kind of makes it worse, because sometimes they look at you like, well, what do I have to be forgiven for? Because they're in complete denial about maybe something they did. So it actually doesn't even make the situation better. No, you don't have to tell someone. Now, if you want to tell someone and you feel like it would be a benefit to them and you, then do it, but you don't have to. And you never have to let them know you forgave them. With my mother, I just changed my behavior towards her. And I think she sensed a change in me, but she didn't know what it was about. But it was a positive thing because I was able to be more tolerant and understanding of her in the last couple of years of her life, especially. So I think even though I never told her I forgave her, I think on some level she probably sensed it. The next thing is kind of related to the idea of not accepting what someone did. Forgiving does not mean forgetting. You don't ever forget what somebody did to you. And if they really did you a wrong, that wrong is always going to sit there. Forgiving is about letting go of all the animosity around it. It's not about forgetting what the person did to you. And I think it actually would be very hard to forget in some cases if the wrong was really serious. I'll give you an example here from my sister, which is that I'm working on forgiving her. It's a process. But it's so difficult because 9 years ago, when our mother died, she did something really, really underhanded and very despicable. My mother we were the only two children of my mother, and she had always said for years that she had a will and everything was equally divided between my sister and me. Now, she didn't have that much money left when she died because a lot of it went to the assisted living place she had been living. But, it was something. It was, maybe, I don't know, $25,000, let's say. I don't know exactly how much it was, but it wasn't a lot of money. But by rights, I should have had half of that. And I never knew any differently. My sister didn't tell me that things had changed or something had changed. And to this day, I don't even know what happened, whether it was my mother who instigated it or my sister and her husband who did it. I don't really know who did it. But basically what happened is when she died, my sister said nothing to me after she had died about her will or about talking to me about the arrangements or anything like that. About 2, 3 weeks later, I actually was on the phone with my sister and I asked her, I said, so I thought you were going to discuss with me, what happened with mom's, not just her money, but also her possessions and stuff. I said, I thought you were going to talk to me about that. And she didn't say anything at all. And so instinctively, I kind of knew that something had changed. And I said, oh, mom changed her will. And she hesitated, and then she just kind of went, yes. And then she offered, and I said, well, I don't understand that because until recently, it was always supposed to be divided. She says, well, I'll talk to you about it later. She never talked to me about it later. She never offered any explanation. She never called me. She never explained. I actually did a search because when you have a will, it has to be probated in the county that you're living in. I checked in the county my mom had been living in, and the will was never probated, which says to me that I think my sister created a trust with her and her husband as beneficiaries, and I was just basically cut out. That's my supposition of what happened. So the reason I mention this is because, and of course this really hurt tremendously, not just because I also needed the money. My sister was, my sister is well off. She does not have money problems. And so I would have needed some money, but it also was the fact that she never gave me an explanation. But anyway, this is an example of how even when I can get to the point I forgive her, I can never forget this. I mean, this was a serious wrong. And she never explained it, never, was kind about it, never, acted at all like, you would think your sister or sibling would. So it was extremely hurtful. And so, yes, forgiving does not mean forgetting. The last thing I'll say about this is you can't really forgive until you're ready to forgive. Until there's something in your heart or mind that says to you, it's time. It's time to forgive. Because until you reach that point, you're not going to be able to do it. I reached that point with my mother, so I was able to do it. I have not reached that point with my sister. And I don't know. I would like to be able to forgive her before she actually does pass away, because then I would feel like somehow if I didn't, then I would feel slightly guilty about that. But I'm not ready yet, and I know, because I still feel such emotion, such anger about our whole life, our lives, and how she's acted towards me most of my life. So it's a hard thing. I had more love from my mother, so it was a little easier. It was a lot easier to be able to forgive her. My sister, I know on some level my sister loves me, but it's so buried and deep that, I do love her. If she called me and just said to me, I don't want to be estranged from you. I want us to be able to talk. I love you. You're my sister. I would forgive her in an instant. In my heart, I would forgive her in an instant. But it's the fact that this just kind of goes on and on with no communication that makes it really hard to forgive, just from my side of it at this point. So anyway, though, and again, reminder that forgiveness is a process. It's not fast. It's not easy. You have to keep at it. It's not like a one-day thing that you can go, oh, I'm just going to instantly forgive this person. It doesn't work that way. It is a process. It takes time. And you just have to chip away at it. Feel the feelings, write things down, journal, meditate on it, whatever you need to do. Talk to friends. Get this out in some way. Because I know from forgiving my mother that it took a while. I don't have an exact amount of time, but it did take a while. It took over the course of probably 2, 3, 4 years. Now, not constantly. I wasn't thinking about it constantly. But the real forgiveness came. You just kind of know when you've reached it. I know that sounds very vague, because for me it is. But you just kind of know when you're there. I don't have really horrible emotional feelings about my mother anymore. They've all just kind of leveled out and dissipated and become more of loving her and missing her now that she's gone. Like, that's what it's turned into. I don't I don't have a lot of the animosity that I used to. So hopefully this helps. Maybe some of these things help you understand why you're having trouble forgiving. This video is running long, so I don't want to go into all the things you can do to start forgiving. I'll probably talk about that in another video at some point again, because forgiveness is a topic I generally go back to once in a while because it is so important for your well-being. It really is. I know it's important for mine. I'm sure it's important for most people's. So anyway, until next time, be well, be kind, keep moving forward, and take care. Bye.